Hello everyone, welcome to Asura Psych, and today I want to talk to you about the 16 MBTI types and their best jobs, or the best occupations for each of these 16 types. Now, the title is actually going to be a little bit misleading because in general, I don't actually think there is a best job for each of the 16 types. And for a video, I could easily just run you through the list of 16 personality types and the most common jobs that they have and tell you that this is the best job for this type. But I don't think that's actually helpful, and instead I want to talk to you about how people use the MBTI in job occupational therapy and helping people find jobs that are going to fulfill them in life. And I want to kind of go over the bigger picture of using MBTI alongside occupational and job therapy to understand where and how someone might find satisfaction within the workforce and work field. Let's get into it. As much as I prefer working with individual types with their cognitive functions, I think there's a really important place for temperaments when it comes to occupational coaching and even occupational therapy down the road. I think that the temperaments of a type can be really beneficial in helping people find out what is interesting to them. But when I'm talking about temperaments, there's going to be a lot of different ways in that we can view each of the personality types and their temperaments. So say, for example, we have the middle two letters, such as the NTs or the SFs. We have the first and last letters, such as the EJs and the IPs. We have the second and last letters, such as the SJs or the NPs. There's lots of different ways that we could divide each of the personality types to attempt to find what is important to them or how they prefer to interact with the world. And it's going to be important to recognize which of these temperamental choices is the most favored with the individual that you're working with to help them understand and find what is going to be interesting and fulfilling to them in the future. So let's look at an example of this. Let's say we have an INTJ. Now with an INTJ, there's lots of different ways that we could view what could potentially be important to them. They are an NT type, so therefore they may prefer things heavily in the realm of the sciences and specifically the more harder sciences with that abstract approach to it. They could be more focused on IJ type things, which could be in the realm of maybe even leadership or organizational skills. They could be interested in things that are part of the NJ temperament, and these INTJs tend to be really heavily focused on implementing their specific and personal goals and desires. This is all going to impact what is important to this INTJ, and understanding what is important to them within their given field of cognitive functions and general interests is going to point them in the right direction. And that's why you can't just look at a specific single type and say, this is the best thing for you and you're probably going to be very satisfied within this one given field. Because that doesn't work most of the time, or all of the time I should say, because of the individual differences with each person, what's going to stand out and be important to them within their given type. I'm not saying that you should think that the statistical trends are not useful when it comes to occupational coaching or trying to find your own personality type job field. What I'm saying is that you should be aware of what is important to yourself or other individuals within their given personality type when it comes to finding what's important to them. These trends in general do absolutely exist. Looking at gifts differing, the source material in MBTI, for example, we can see that in one of the studies that they did with graduate students and professionals, less than 1% of SF types ended up in research scientist positions, while 77% of the research scientists were NT types. Now, if you go over to the counseling profession, 76% of people were NF types, or 76% of the people in this sample were NF types, while only 6% were ST and 9% were NTs. What's important to remember, though, is that these outliers there do exist, and for these people, it's likely for them that this is a fulfilling job, or it could be a fulfilling job, or it's at least something that they're heavily interested in. The outliers of personality types absolutely do exist, and that's why you can find people who are in fields that are not normally represented by their specific personality type, and they're usually doing things in a way that's going to change the field that they're in because they're not kind of conforming to the norms of the field. They're not doing the things the way most people have been doing them in the field. Now, I'm not saying that if, for example, an NF isn't going to change counseling, because I'm sure that lots of NFs have made huge contributions to the field of counseling. But what I'm saying is that when you take someone who has a completely different perspective and put them in a new field, there's a chance that all of the people within that field are going to kind of recognize the ideas that this person has as being different because they're from an entirely different angle. I'm sure somewhere in the world there's a very successful ESTP counselor. And you might think, wow, that sounds really weird. That doesn't sound like that would be a very normal job occupation for them, but it could be there. But it's important to remember when working with occupational and job therapies that you have to find that fine balance between what is the normal common career path for this personality type and what is the desires, what are the desires of the individual that I'm working with? What are the things that they want? And is there a marriage between these two things that could be found that might be able to help them find a job field that is fulfilling? To get an understanding of what I mean by fulfilling here, let's compare the NF and the SF temperaments and some of the most common field or job choices for these two temperaments. So as I mentioned previously, counseling, like by far, is one of the most common occupational choices for NF types. Doesn't matter if it's NFJs or NFPs. Now, when we look at the SF types, statistically, their most common fields are customer relations or sales. So think about these two fields and think about the very subtle differences in them that are going to be influenced by maybe the temperamental or cognitive function differences within these two types. Well, NFs are going to be working with people in a way that is generally more abstract. You're going to be talking to them about things like mental health, how they're feeling. Feelings in general tend to be a more abstract concept. They're going to be talking about things more related to theory in general. Whereas you look at SFs and you look at customer relations or maybe even sales, and you'll see that this is a very down-to-earth, realistic way of interacting with other people. You're trying to either get them to engage with a product, you're trying to interact and get them to feel better in a more kind of immediate moment instead of trying to talk to them about their kind of abstract feelings. This is going to be the difference in what is fulfilling, because you might find, for example, that the SF is going to enjoy their customer service position, not because it is customer service or sales or these sorts of things, but because of the practical human interaction that is associated with being an SF type, or associated with that field that the SF type would enjoy, And for example, you also would find that this is the reason that ISFJs are the most common type to be nurses among all of the personality types. And it's because ISFJs are going to be the types who enjoy that very down-to-earth practical way of helping people feel better, as opposed to NFs who enjoy the more abstract kind of communicative way of helping people feel better through abstract ideas like, therapy discussions, these sorts of things. I know I said I wasn't going to go through all of the 16 types and list what is the best and worst job for them, but I do want to talk about this with the temperaments, because I think with the temperaments we can recognize what is generally valuable through these temperaments and what is generally something that is seen as either difficult or unimportant. But it isn't something that's always going to be unimportant to them. It's just something that as a trend is going to be something that is less likely for them to see as interesting. So we'll start with the STs. The most common job fields for STs are accountants, bank employees, and finance and commerce workers. Also, lawyers are usually one that is listed for STs as well, although it's not in the specific list. What about this job field, or these job fields, are the uniting themes? What is the commonality between the ST fields of accounting, bank employees, commerce, and being a lawyer? Well, all of these fields require an exceptional attention to detail. They require you to be able to work with raw numbers. Finance and accounting is literally like numbers, spreadsheets, data tables. These are things that are going to stand out to someone who is of the ST temperament. They're going to be things that this temperament on average is going to be good at, and therefore if they're good at it, it's something that maybe even be fulfilling to them. Now, on the opposite side of things, let's look at the least likely fields for the STs to be in. We've got liberal theology and counseling, as well as research scientist, although I think that one may be skewed because I think there are a lot of STs in research science, so I'm not exactly sure where that number came from. But either way, we can find that liberal theology definitely doesn't seem like something that you would find the average ST in, because liberal theology is about as, NF as you can get, maybe NT as well, but that tends to be something that's very abstract, moral focused, these sorts of things, where you're not going to find many STs wanting to discuss topics like this that don't have realistic or immediate application to the things that they're interested in. Looking at the SF temperament, we can see that their most common occupation choices are sales and customer relations, nursing, and education. And again, this goes back to what I discussed earlier about all of these fields being very down to earth, practical. You're interacting with people in a very immediate kind of sense. You get to see the immediate repercussions of your actions, as opposed to maybe trying to guide them through some sort of intuitive path or put them on some sort of path that might help them later on down the line. And that's what the SF type tends to enjoy about these fields, is there's these very immediate rewards for the things that they're doing. There's this kind of, all right, I'm helping you and I get to see the look of joy on your face as I'm helping you right now, instead of the delayed gratification that you might find with the NF types. Now, the things that are less likely to be interesting to the SF types are things like research science, science in general. Surprisingly, counseling is listed as one of their lower job fields, and that might be because it's oppositional to the pretty standard SF approach of just talking to people and trying to understand them in that immediate sense. Moving on to the NFs, we can see that their most common fields are creative writing, counseling, health-related professions, and journalism. All of these really do, in my opinion, go in line with the general NF type, the NF temperament, excuse me. You'll find that, again, it's going to be that more abstract approach to what do I want to get from this person? What is the theme of the discussion here? How are they feeling? Can I put them on a path that might help them later on down the road? And you're going to find that the NFs in general prefer that delayed gratification approach to helping other people as opposed to that more immediate response. And you can get that feeling of, oh, I feel like they're going to leave this room here today and be better than they were when they came into it. That is going to be something that's pretty satisfying to the NFs. Where with the SF, it's like, oh, they're having fun with me right now. They're having a good time right now. That is fulfilling to me. And that's, again, going to be the differences between SFs and NFs in general temperamental trends. But the important thing to remember here is, again, these are all just trends. You can find people who are within these job fields and find them fulfilling, despite the fact that they go against what is traditionally important to those temperaments. Lastly, we have the NT types, and this is probably going to come at no surprise to anyone that the NT types' most likely job field is research science and science in general. The NTs in general are going to be focused on something in the realm of research or science a good majority of the time, and it's because intuition and thinking together as a temperament leads them to have these general interests. Now, I know I didn't talk about specific type and cognitive functions throughout this video, but I will go into one example of how we can see the differences in types and temperaments when it comes to how they approach their field. So say, for example, we look at an INTP and an INTJ, the two types that are more likely than any other type to end up in research science. These types tend to approach research in two very different ways, and they're going to find different things valuable within the realm of research or science. A lot of the times, INTPs tend to be trying to understand the world. They're trying to develop some sort of theory that explains something. Again, you could think of an example like Albert Einstein describing the law of relativity. This is going to be something that you would see with a TINE type. They're experimenting. They're trying to learn about the world. There's this desire for understanding. Then you look at an INTJ and you see that a lot of the times when they're working in research or science, it's for the purpose of trying to bring some sort of thing into the light, trying to understand something by creating it. It's not as inventive as, say, the ENTPs, but usually it's, I have an idea that I think could potentially be true, and I'm going to perform the research to attempt to bring this thing into some sort of realistic sense. That's what you would see with maybe an INTJ as opposed to an INTP. With INTJs, there's less of a desire for actual understanding and more for implementation. While with the INTP, you have the desire for understanding and maybe less so with implementation. But then these two types can work together to do a lot of great things together. But that is going to be one of the differences in how you might find that the differences with the cognitive functions of the individual type can be reflected within the temperament. But this gets even more difficult when you start to look at the individual preferences of the individual of a specific type compared to their temperament, compared to other temperaments. For example, I'm an INTJ who's interested in counseling and research related to mental health, which is something that's typically in the field of NF. So therefore, my interests don't align perfectly with my temperament, despite the fact that I am an NT. And that is something that I have found is actually not that uncommon when you're working with people who are struggling to find an occupational job that fits them. And I think this is actually really interesting. I think the people that struggle the most with finding an occupational job are the ones who might not be in line with what is normally interesting to their specific temperament. So say, for example, they might have been ushered into a job or field that everyone else thought would be really good for them because of their personality, but it just isn't fulfilling to them. It's not interesting, and therefore they're really struggling to adapt and survive in this environment. And that's where it would be beneficial to talk to someone who really knows about MBTI type or knows about career counseling or coaching and say, okay, what are the things that are important to you within your specific interests, within your personality? How can I help you find what is valuable to you, and how is that going to be translated into some sort of either job or occupation. And that's actually what I try to do in my business coaching when I work with individuals, is if they come to me and they're not exactly sure what to do, I say, well, what is important to you? What's valuable to you? These are the things that should be guiding your future decisions. Because if you try to go into a job field that, just pays well for the sake of paying well, then you're maybe not going to be very satisfied. On the other side of things, though, there's people who pay is the only thing they're genuinely interested in. And so I would say to them, get that promotion. You're going to be working hard, but go ahead, go for that promotion. Whereas on the other side, I've had to tell people, maybe you shouldn't get this promotion. Maybe you should consider doing something else, because it sounds like this is going to change your job to the point where it's going to be something that is no longer interesting or valuable to you. And is that going to be worth the sacrifice just for a small pay raise? These are the general kind of ideas and topics that are difficult to talk about when it comes to type and temperament and occupation, because you can't just generalize everything into one temperament and say, all right, here's the golden ticket for you to go find what is valuable and interesting to you. You have to stop and say, okay, given this person's temperament, given their type, given their functions, given their personal interests, given their upbringing, given what is generally important to them, what is going to be the best choice for this person? And I think that that's the approach you should take with yourself and with other people when attempting to help yourself or others find what is going to be a good job or occupation for you. All right, everybody, I hope you've enjoyed this discussion on occupation and jobs in relation to MBTI types and temperaments. I know I talked a lot about temperaments today, which is something I usually don't discuss on this channel, but I do think that temperaments are generally something that's very useful when we're talking about occupations and jobs. So let me know down in the comment section below, do you have any specific jobs or occupations that you think are very good for your personality type? Do you have any that you think are very bad for your personality type? Do you work in a field that maybe isn't as common for your personality type, or do you find that you actually really enjoy the things that are in line with your temperament and your personality type? Let me know down in the comment section below. Other than that, I would like to remind people that I do have personality typing sessions available at my website at surasec.com if you're interested in working with me to find out what your personality type is and what that means for you. This has been Asura from Asura Psych. Have a good one.